Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. Some years ago, I flew down to Avon Park, Florida to write about a little girl in kindergarten who was arrested, handcuffed, and taken away by the police because she had thrown a tantrum in class. When I mentioned to the police chief that the child was only 6 years old, he replied with a straight face, "Do you think this is the first 6-year-old we've arrested?" The unwarranted criminalization of childish and adolescent behavior has become a national epidemic over the past several years. Water balloon fights, throwing erasers, writing on desks, even wearing too much perfume have gotten kids in trouble with the police, who now patrol many of our public schools and in too many cases have become the enforcers of school discipline. Infractions that got you sent to the principal's office when I was in school can get you sent to jail today. We'll talk about this and other criminal justice and civil liberties matters with my guest, Donna Lieberman, the Executive Director of the New York Civil Liberties Union. Donna, thank you for coming in. I appreciate it. When do we get to this idea that ordinary childhood behavior, infractions, misbehaviors ought to be handled by the police?
Well, I can tell you when it started happening in New York City, which is back in the late days of the Giuliani administration, 1992, when the city transferred the responsibility for school discipline from the Board of Education to the NYPD. And at that time, the police commissioner said, "Don't worry, we would never arrest kids in school. That would be absurd." They promised us that. There are news clips. But since then, and during the Bloomberg administration, the number of cops in schools mushroomed from about 1,000 when the transfer first happened to over 5,000 now. And at the same time, there were more cops than social workers, more cops than guidance counselors, and no increase in those numbers. So the only tools at the disposal of the schools to deal with kids who misbehave was the cops. And it's crazy. As you say, children as young as 5 years old end up in handcuffs for throwing a tantrum. Right. Really?
It's really crazy, but 5,000 is such a high number of police officers. We have under 40,000 for the entire city. The idea that there's that many in the schools. So are they in all the schools?
There's probably one school safety officer, at least in every school, but they're concentrated in the high schools and middle schools and in what are called impact schools,
right.
Schools that have been deemed to be somehow dangerous.
So how do they function? I mean, one, where are they stationed on an ordinary school day? Are they in uniform, and how are they summoned to a problem?
Well, you know, it varies, and what we see though is that unfortunately, as things are set up, when parents send their kids to school, they think they're sending them into the care of trained educators. As it turns out, even though discipline is a significant part of education, responsibility for school discipline is in the hands of the cops.
The overall responsibility?
The responsibility for discipline. It's the school suspensions happen by teachers and principals, but when a kid is misbehaving in the hallway, or even when a child is not misbehaving but somehow crosses a school safety officer, that child can end up in handcuffs. You know, and instead
right.
of going to the principal's office with a disciplinary matter, you have school safety officers who are not trained to deal with children in a nurturing fashion, dealing with them as if they're on the streets and treating them like criminal suspects. So it really poisons the environment in the schools. And there's a whole squad of school safety officers who are charged with manning these metal detectors. You know, metal detectors to get into schools? I mean, that's absolutely, it sends the wrong message. It's crazy. It's intrusive. Kids have to wait online in order to get to school. You know, even if a metal detector is appropriate for a brief period of time in an occasional school, We have permanent metal detectors in a huge number of our city junior high schools, and it's crazy.
When a youngster is busted by the cops at a school, it's generally for what kinds of offenses, and what happens to those kids?
Well, you know, the lion's share of police interactions have to do with summonses. So I think it's really, really telling that I think 69% of the approximately about 1,000, more or less, summonses that get given out in a school in a given year are for disorderly conduct. I mean, what translates as misbehaving better than disorderly conduct? And so, you know, we have urged the de Blasio administration to end the tyranny of the police over school discipline. You know, school discipline needs to be a matter where final judgment and the whole decision-making path is educational. It's about protecting and teaching and nurturing the kids, not about pushing them out of school and into jail. And so we've pressed for that, and we've pressed for an end to criminal summonses for misbehavior. There is no excuse that any child should be forced to appear in court, lose time from school, by the way, for being disorderly in school, or for trespassing on school premises, for trying to go to basketball practice without your ID, or music rehearsal. These are all things that have happened. And you know, as of yet, you know, we have not seen the fundamental change in how school discipline is meted out. And there are two types of disciplines that happen side by side. There's the policing, the arrests and the summonses, which criminalizes kids, but then there's the other exclusionary discipline, which is suspensions, the overuse of suspensions for things that should be dealt with in school. Why is it that the first response to a kid getting into trouble is you know, recommending a year's suspension? And what we see is, because of this overreaction to school, to misbehavior, that teachers have been kind of deprogrammed from using their tools, using their words, using what they've learned as educators, and like call the cops in because a kid won't close the book in class. So they have lost the tools that they need, and so they need training in conflict resolution and how to positive behavioral interventions, and so do the school safety officers, who are necessary. You need a safety patrol in a school, but it's a safety patrol that's supposed to protect the kids, not target them. I
mean, it seems insane to me, the idea that there's some minor disruption in the classroom and then a police officer or police officers are called in. So you mentioned Bill de Blasio. So we have a new mayor, there's a new schools chancellor. How receptive have they been to making substantial changes in these procedures?
Well, up until now, you know, really we have not seen changes. We've seen slight drops in the numbers that started towards the end of the Bloomberg administration in terms of the number of arrests and summonses, but we haven't seen changes in the structure yet, and we need to change the structure. There is no excuse for New York City engaging in a policy of handcuffing 5-year-olds. I don't care if it's metal handcuffs or plastic handcuffs or Velcro handcuffs. A 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, and virtually every 15, 16, 17-year-old, nobody should be subject to handcuffing for going to school and misbehaving unless there's a serious danger to the kids around them or to the adults. But we handcuff kids.
I couldn't agree with you more. When I went down to Florida for the 6-year-old, the kindergarten girl who was handcuffed, arrested, the handcuffs were too large for her wrist. They kept slipping off her wrist. So the cops actually cuffed her up by the biceps and put her in the back of a police car. That would traumatize an adult, much less a 6-year-old. We've just come through a long controversy over New York's stop and frisk policy. The way it was enforced was declared unconstitutional, so supposedly the city has been stopping stop and frisk. Has that really happened?
Well, the numbers that are reported on stop and frisk are way down, and that's good news. Unfortunately, we have not seen an accompanying decrease in the number of low-level arrests. You know, broken windows policing is one of those terms that means like different things to different people, but you know, and Commissioner Bratton stands by it, but
he's a big proponent of broken windows.
Yeah, and the level of misdemeanor arrests, for example, for marijuana, hasn't dropped since the days of the Bloomberg administration. And you know, while they're down from like the peak during the Bloomberg administration, they are still 7 or 8 times higher than they were during the 90s. And why on earth are we arresting so many people for low-level marijuana possession, and why is it that the people who get arrested are 85 to 90% Black and Latino? You know, this is one crime where we have crime, you know, marijuana possession, really. You know, we have public health data on who uses marijuana, who buys and sells marijuana, and whites use and sell it more.
Almost everybody I know has smoked marijuana at some point or other.
Yeah, you know, it makes me cringe when mayors and district attorney candidates, you know, kind of smirk and say, "Of course I tried it.
Right.
I tried it. I liked it."
Right.
You know, but they never had to worry about getting arrested. And the consequences of an arrest. There's a new report out that shows that I think 3/4 of the people who are arrested for marijuana possession, that's possession of less than an ounce, this is their first offense. And having a record, having a criminal record for marijuana possession is something that is a burden for your entire life. You know, and they talk about, you know, ending the tale of two cities, but it's only Black and Latino, mainly young people, who are at risk for carrying that burden of an arrest for marijuana with them for their lives.
And it's also not just marijuana, though. I mean, people are getting summonses, for example, for riding the bicycle on the sidewalk, but that clearly depends on the neighborhood. I live on the Upper West Side, and I see people on the Upper West Side and on the Upper East Side, and I see people on the bicycles on the sidewalk, and they never get busted. But also having open containers and that sort of thing. Do the police and do you think the mayor really believes that these kinds of arrests and summonses keep serious crime down? Is that your experience talking with folks on and off the record? Is that really what they believe?
Well, I think that they say that we make low-level arrests to maintain order and to keep, you know, violence from happening. But, you know, sort of like marijuana just doesn't pass the laugh test. Ooh, was that a pun? You know, you know, it's nobody in their right mind thinks that smoking a joint on the street has anything to do with, you know, the robbery. That isn't going to happen. There's no evidence that arresting people for low-level offenses like this reduces violent crime. But what it does is, and what we saw really dramatically and painfully during the Bloomberg years, was that it instills an aura of fear into the community, and it undermines the relationship between the police and communities who rely on them for protection. So it's really quite devastating. And, you know, I don't think it's racially, you know, it's racist in intent, but the impact is so discriminatory and so harmful.
If it's not racist in intent, then how do we explain the sustained disparities by race year after year, decade after decade? You look and you see people who are white, and you look and you see people who are Black, you see the same kinds of offenses, and you arrest the ones who are Black. Why is that not racist in intent?
Well, you know, I don't want to defend that it's not racist in intent. You know, I think that the impact is more than sufficient to cry out, to scream out for a change. It is entirely, you know, I think that people of goodwill will try to rationalize this. You know, the law, and I've had arguments with top police officers of color in the NYPD, who say, well, the law is written the way it is, change the law. I agree, change the law.
Well, how do they explain the disparities, though?
What they will
in other words, why not more white people being arrested, for example?
What they will say is we go where the crime is. So if we have a lot of cops on the street in a high crime neighborhood, which everybody agrees is a high crime neighborhood, we're going to see more of the marijuana going on. I think that that's really a misguided rationale for a policy that is devastating. You don't see people, cops busting people on Wall Street after work or during lunchtime for smoking a joint. And you know what? That's a good thing. But it would be a better thing if they didn't bother people who were smoking a joint on the street in Brownsville as well. I mean, the racial, and even it's in black neighborhoods, white neighborhoods, Latino neighborhoods. The people who get arrested for low-level marijuana are overwhelmingly people of color.
Or, for example, open containers. If you go into more upscale white neighborhoods and someone's having, a group of friends over and they're on the, the front stoop, or they're in the, a little park area or something like that, never bothered or seldom bothered by the police. But it strikes me that there's an arc. So you have the police in the schools, and you have youngsters getting summonses, in some cases getting arrested in elementary school, and then it goes all the way through junior high and high school. So there's these encounters with the police. And then there's the problem of the disparate enforcement of broken windows type violations or crimes. And then finally you'll get to these very serious issues we see with violence and people being shot, beaten, killed in various ways and stuff like that. So there's this sustained arc that affects black and brown people more than others. Talk about the impact of that. I mean, people talk about the school to prison pipeline, but what are some of the results? Lives ruined?
Yeah, I think that we know that kids who are suspended or arrested in school are less likely to graduate and more likely to go to jail, and that's a fact. But the collateral consequences of an arrest are huge. It means when you spend time in jail, it means disrupting families. And that means not just like the individual who's in jail, but the kids, being without a parent. It means the parents losing their jobs because they're absent from work, whether it's because they're in jail or because they have to go to multiple court appearances. It means that people plead guilty to things when they're not really guilty because either they don't have a lawyer, or they can't afford to take the time off from work. And with marijuana, few people know this, but two convictions of anything involving marijuana are automatic deportation for an immigrant. So a person with a green card who is lawfully living and working and raising a family in the United States gets two marijuana convictions, they are out. They are automatically deported. There's no defense to that.
Which means their lives are turned upside down. Their
lives, their kids' lives, their entire family's lives turned upside down. And we as a society lose the benefit of productive individuals in our society. And the people in the police department who are making these decisions are unaware of or don't take into consideration the horrific collateral consequences. I mean, people get denied access to education because they lose eligibility for scholarships for
How
these
can
things.
they be unaware? You're aware, I'm aware, you read the newspapers, you see television programs, the police, the people in the mayoral administrations, one after another, they have to be aware. Michael Bloomberg was not aware. Bill de Blasio, who talks about the tale of two cities, he must be aware.
Well, they should be aware, and certainly the people around them should be aware. And it's time, it's long past time, to change the policies of excessive arrests for low-level offenses. You know, police need to be trained to diffuse conflict, to de-escalate, to have other tools in their toolkit besides the handcuffs, and they need that training on the streets. If they're going to be in the schools, they need that training in the schools, and our teachers need the training to like reclaim the responsibility and the authority that they have had for centuries to like teach our kids and to nurture them.
One of the issues you guys have been working on has been the issue of the right to counsel for the poor. This was an issue that a lot of us thought was settled decades ago with Supreme Court rulings and that sort of thing. Obviously, it hasn't been. What's going on with right to counsel?
So about 7 years ago, the New York Civil Liberties Union filed a class action lawsuit because the system of providing lawyers for poor people charged with crimes was like so totally dysfunctional. There had been several commissions, including the K Commission, which said this system is beyond repair. You got to overhaul it. And we documented what was going on in 5 counties, including Suffolk County, where we have, you know, the playground of the rich, and Onondaga, Syracuse, and some smaller counties, Washington, Schuyler, and where people were being arrested and appearing before the judge, either without a lawyer or with a lawyer who never talked to them until they got to court. And lawyers were so overwhelmed that they had neither the tools nor the mandate to investigate defenses, to bring in a forensic expert now and again. I mean,
so the case never gets investigated properly.
And people are under pressure to plead guilty. We took a wheel of justice. We had a wheel of justice that we took around the state, where basically you spin the wheel of justice, and depending on, you know, the luck of the draw, you know, if you land on the dollar sign, well, you can afford a lawyer, you'll get justice. But if you don't, right, you're going to get, you know, some measure of court-assigned counsel, and you could lose your home, you could lose your family, you could lose your kids, and you can lose your job. And people spent enormous amounts of time, you know, in jail because they didn't have effective assistance of counsel. So fast forward to, you know, 50 years after Gideon's trumpet and the promise of a lawyer at every criminal proceeding, and we finally reached a settlement with the state of New York to overhaul the delivery of public defense in the 5 counties where we sued, and set up the Office of Indigent Legal Services, which is already in existence, but to resource it and give it the mandate to establish caseload caps, to provide for a lawyer at every arraignment, and to really lay the foundation for a fundamental overhaul of the statewide system that would be overseen by the Office of Indigent Legal Services. So it's a huge victory. 50 years in the making. Do you believe that?
It took half a century.
Just half a century.
Too bad. We only had half an hour. Donna, this has been great. I hope you'll come back, and we'll talk about some other issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. The late-night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel recently sent a camera crew onto Hollywood Boulevard to ask passersby, who is Joe Biden? This was a comedy bit, so the answers were suitably wacky, ranging from our governor to I have no idea to is he a movie star to he's the assistant president. Now, these answers were selected to be funny, so you have to take them with a grain of salt, right? Fine. But then a few days later comes a full-blown study of 4-year college and university graduates conducted by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. What were the findings? That disturbingly large numbers of Americans with college degrees don't know such basic things as the length of a congressional term, the purpose of the Emancipation Proclamation, or which American president gave us the New Deal. That doesn't say much for our collective civic knowledge or our capacity to understand complex issues like the true state of our economy, the influence of big money in politics, or the latest developments in wars that we're fighting in the Middle East. Maybe we need to look up from our electronic devices every now and then and pay a bit more attention to the real world that we're living in. That's all for now. See you next time.